Joy gives us wings. In times of joy, our strength is more vital, our intellect keener, and our understanding less clouded. We seem better able to cope with the world and to find our sphere of usefulness. But when sadness visits us, we become weak. Our strength leaves us. Our comprehension is dim and our intelligence failed. The actualities of life seem to elude our grasp. The eyes of our spirits fail to discover the sacred mysteries, and we become even as dead beings. There is no human being untouched by these two influences, but all the sorrow and the grief that exist come from the world of matter. The spiritual world bestows only the joy. If we suffer, it is the outcome of material things, and all the troubles and trials come from this world of illusion. Abdu'l-Baha. Happiness consists of two kinds, physical and spiritual. The physical happiness is limited. Its utmost duration is 1 day, 1 month, 1 year. It hath no result. Spiritual happiness is eternal and unfathomable. Abdu'l-Baha.
Thank you. So our speaker today is Ms. Sovaida Mani, and she'll be talking about the secret to living a happy and fulfilled life, a Baha'i perspective. Ms. Sovaida Mani Ewing is an author, speaker, international lawyer, life mastery coach, and founding director of the Center for Peace and Global Governance, a virtual think tank and online forum that pools and proposes principled solutions to pressing global challenges. Her latest book, available on Amazon, is The Alchemy of Peace: 6 Essential Shifts in Mindsets and Habits to Achieve World Peace. She also hosts a live video podcast, Reimagining Our World, on Facebook and the CPGG YouTube channel that's dedicated to creating a vision of the world we want and infusing hope that we can make the choices necessary to attain it. So with that, I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you. It's such a joy to be here, speaking of joy and happiness with all of you. It's one of the things that definitely, for me, I know uplifts my spirit. I've been asked before we dive into the topic at hand to give those of you who may be here for the first time a brief introduction to the Baha'i Faith. I am going to make it very brief, and I would urge you, if you're interested, to contact any one of us for more information, or to go online to get further info. So essentially, Baha'is believe that religion is not absolute, but relative. It is not spasmodic, but it's orderly, continuous, and progressive. What this essentially means is that a loving creator who created all of us, regardless of the name with which we call this creator, has from time to time and continues from time to time during the course of our historical evolution to send us divine teachers to educate and edify us and provide us with spiritual truths that help us to grow and that conduce to our happiness. So here's one of the keys right here. These teachers' messages build on each other, very much like the teachings of teachers in a school. Each teacher builds on the work that's done by the teachers in the grades below. So we shouldn't get too attached to the one teacher. We need to keep recognizing that there are new teachers that come. Now, Baha'u'llah, the prophet founder of the Baha'i Faith, claims to be the latest, not the last, but the latest in a series of these progressive, divine, and continuous revelations. He's come at this very particular time in human history in which something else has been happening. So when we look at human history, according to the Baha'i view, humanity as a collective whole has been going through various stages of growth, starting with its infancy, childhood, basically adolescence, and so on. The Baha'i writings tell us that right now we all stand in the throes of a very turbulent adolescence. I think all we need to do is to look at the news of the last few months, few years, few days, few weeks, and we see how humanity is in different ways acting out, very much as we all did when we were teenagers. And yet our parents didn't throw us out of the house because they had perspective. They recognized that this was a phase, that it would pass, and that we would eventually move toward maturity. So this is what humanity is striving for, to get to this next stage in its collective development, which is its maturity that is manifested by its unity. Now, again, looking at the world today, you might find it very difficult to believe that we're anywhere close to being unified. But this is a process, and it is precisely for this reason, to help us make this huge shift from a turbulent adolescence to maturity, that the Creator has chosen to send Baha'u'llah this next amazing divine revelation. Now, the cardinal principle that Baha'u'llah has brought is the principle of the oneness of humanity and the oneness of nations. This is central to all of Baha'u'llah's teachings. It's the pivot around which all his principles revolve. Another way to cast it that I find very useful is that our oneness is a spiritual law. So just like we have physical laws that govern our physical reality, like the law of gravity, that we need to take into account if we're wise. So for instance, in building an airplane, we need to take it into account. We could choose to ignore it because we do have free will, but the consequences wouldn't be very pleasant for an airplane that tries to fly, not taking that principle into account. So too, if we try to build, as we have been doing for a long time now, institutions, economic, political, environmental, social, religious, that fail to take into account this principle of oneness, we see what happens. And in fact, when I look around the world and I see all of these troubles and trials and tribulations and torments and disasters and social injustices, the root cause really of all of them is a failure on the part of us human beings and of our leaders to recognize this fundamental spiritual principle or spiritual law that we're all one. And when you think hard about everything that's been going on the last few weeks, think about how the world would be different if we were to take this principle as a premise and an assumption, and then start crafting whatever solutions starting from that basis. All religion has the purpose, according to Baha'u'llah, of bringing about a transformation in two things: in our individual lives, so the development of our character and the development of our souls, and at the same time, the development of society. And one of the distinguishing features of the Baha'i faith is that it is as concerned with the development of society as it is with individual redemption, the redemption of my soul, my desire to do well in the afterlife and so on. And the last thing I'll say is, to this end, to contribute to the transformation of both society and individuals, Baha'u'llah has brought two things that are key. One is a blueprint for the kind of structure that the world needs to have in order for it to become a place of peace and to create an environment in which we can all actualize our potential, while also providing us with a set of principles that I think of as tools which we use to build out this blueprint. And those tools are really the spiritual teachings and the principles underlying the Baha'i faith. You can learn more by, as I say, reaching out to one of us or by and looking online. You can also ask questions later when we finish our little dialogue today on the topic. So I'm now going to share my screen so that we can start. The secret to living a happy and fulfilled life from a Baha'i perspective. Sorry. Yes. Many of us have achieved success in terms of how the world perceives success. And yet many of us remain surprisingly unfulfilled and unhappy. Indeed, we often feel very empty. And today what we're going to do is to explore why this is. And I want to posit right from the start that the reason for this is that we have, each of us and all of us, we operate on the basis of a set of assumptions, a set of limiting beliefs, a way of interpreting our reality, my own reality, where I was born, and whether I'm black or white or yellow or red, and whether I'm woman or man, and whether I was poor or rich, and whether I have opportunities or not, and just so many things that we then take to mean a whole bunch of other things, how people treat me, how people perceive me. And on the basis of that, we then start to experience life. We have feelings and emotions that then create unhappiness or happiness and joy. But most of us actually feel very unfulfilled and unhappy because these assumptions operate in the background of who we are. They are kind of like the operating system of a computer. We don't recognize all the code that's gone into building these systems, including the system we're using today, Zoom, in order to talk to each other. We just use it. But it has effects on how this thing actually presents and functions. Now, the benefits, one of the boons of divine revelation that we've just talked about, is that with the coming of each divine teacher, we're given a new set of lenses through which to understand our reality, our existence, the world around us. And the way we frame what's going on will dictate to a large extent whether we're happy, unhappy, fulfilled, or unfulfilled. So let's start with one of the first lenses that Baha'u'llah in his writings has given us. What if we were to understand and believe what it says in this quote, that each of us have been created by the Creator, but unto each one have been prescribed a preordained measure. Now, this is a very interesting concept, that you and I have come into this world with basically a predetermined capacity. People are initially not always happy with this idea because we all have this notion that we're just all the same and we're all equal. Yes, we're equal in the way we should treat each other, equal in terms of our nobility and dignity. However, our capacities are different. Now, the second thing that Baha'u'llah says is that not only are we born with an inherent potential, but one of the two moral purposes for which we've been created is to develop our inherent potentialities. So it's actually incumbent upon us to develop these capacities, and therefore we need to understand what they are. The Universal House of Justice, that is the author of this quote here, by the way, is the governing body of the Baha'i Faith, the current governing body that is an elected body. And again, you can learn more about this later, but it is the body to which all the Baha'is around the world now turn for guidance. Now, the next point is, each of our capacities do differ from each other. So if we're each born with a preordained measure of capacity, then our capacities are different from each other. Here are a couple of quotes from the Baha'i writings, from the son of Baha'u'llah, who was also an authorized interpreter of his writings, in which we're told that all humanity possesses intelligence and capacities, but they are different. But this does not imply good or evil. It just is a difference of degree. So an example that is given by Abdul Baha on this topic is, he says, look at the children in a same family. They are born and live in the same place, same parents, go to the same school, instructed by the same teachers, eat the same food, have the same culture, the same clothing, study the same lessons. And yet you see very quickly distinctions in the capacities of these children. Some will be of average ability, some will be really smart, some will be dull, some will be good in the sciences, some will be good at music, and so on. So he says, there is clearly a difference in degree again, but that's all it is, a difference in degree. And there is no judgment that is associated with, this degree is better than that degree, I'm higher, you're lower. This is really a key point. The other thing that the Baha'i writings tell us is that while our capacities may vary, no one is completely bereft of capacity. So everybody has capacity. And in fact, progress in this world is dependent on that preordained measure and the manner in which we go about fulfilling it. So now let's get to that. So our capacities are different. It just implies a difference in degree. And now we go to, so how do we deal with this fact? It's critical, and this is really the crux of the matter, that what matters is not the size of our capacity, of the receptacle, but of how much of it we fill. This is a brilliant quote, pardon the typo, in which we're told that our duty is to attain the share of the grace being this capacity that we've been endowed with, that God has poured into us. Let none, therefore, consider the largeness or smallness of the receptacle. So here we're immediately told, because this is what humans do, we immediately start comparing and thinking, well, wait a minute, my capacity is greater or smaller than yours, and how am I doing in relation to everyone around me? So we are not to consider the largeness or smallness of the capacity. And again, to hammer home that there is a difference, Baha'u'llah, the prophet founder for Bahá'í Faith, says, the portion of some of us might lie in the palm of our hand, the other might fill a cup, the other a gallon measure. Okay, so let's unpack this a little. Let's say that let's take you and I as an example here. Let's say that I have the capacity of a teaspoon and you have the capacity of a bathtub. Let's say that throughout my life, I completely fill my teaspoon, and you, by the end of your life, end up filling half of your bathtub. Now, how do you think we should assess how we're doing? Well, given today's standards, which tend to be absolute standards, what we would normally hear people say is, well, gee whiz, that's really easy. You just have, in terms of quantity of water, that being the absolute measure, you have 1 teaspoon. I, on the other hand, half a bathtub. Wow, how many teaspoons can you get into, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of teaspoons? So of course I'm doing better. I filled half a bathtub. Aha, but what's missing from this assessment is the fact that I have fulfilled 100% of my potential. I went ahead and did my very best, and I did everything I could to fulfill all of my potential. Whereas you have fulfilled 50% of your potential. Now, what this demonstrates is the nonsensical nature of comparing. When we have such different capacities, it's not about comparing against absolute standards. The second thing is that what we should actually be focused on is we're competing, if we need to compete, against ourselves and our capacity, our preordained measure. The question we should every day be asking ourselves is, how much of my capacity have I been able to fulfill, and what do I need to do to strive to fulfill a larger ratio of my capacity? So that should be the way we measure. Now, this brings us to the next point, that not only have we been given a predetermined capacity, but we've been given a really important gift that helps us to fulfill that capacity. And that is the gift of volition, which is free will harnessed in action. Baha'u'llah, in fact, says, all which you potentially possess can only, that is the key word, be manifested how? As a result of your own volition. So if we don't harness our willpower, potential remains potential. This actually brings to mind a story, a humorous aside. Years ago, before I was married, I went to California, and I ended up in the home of these people whom I didn't know in Palo Alto, a beautiful home up on the hill, and they had invited some really wonderful guests, none of whom I knew. And this lady kind of walked up to me out of the blue, and she said, I feel I have a message to give you. And I said, okay, this is California, anything goes. What's the message? I'm receptive. And she said, when you look for a spouse next time, and I don't know, there's no way she could have known this was the next time, She said, don't look for potential. She said, potential is so overrated. It's all about what work the person has done to actualize the potential. So look at how well this person has done in fulfilling their potential. So as I was preparing for my remarks today, I was reminded of that, and it brought a smile to my face. I don't know where this lady is now, but I do remember her with great fondness, and she was absolutely right. Now, to hammer this point home, there is a very interesting analogy given in the Baha'i writings that I love. It really works for me, in which Abdu'l-Baha, again, the son of Baha'u'llah, says that we, as human souls, are akin to weavers. We are weavers of what? We are weavers of this thing called life, the tapestry of our life. He says, when we're born, a loom and threads are provided to us. So the tools are provided to us. We have no control over either the quality of the loom or the threads. So some of us may be born with threads that are colorful, that are made of silk. Some of us are born with threads made of wool or hemp or dull gray yarn. That is not, we're not responsible for that because we had no control of it. So when I was born, I did not ask to be born in, but was born in East Africa. I was born in Kenya. I happened to be born to a mother who had just lost her husband a few days before I was born. And life was rough and it was difficult. And it was just before independence in Kenya, and it was a time of great danger with the Mau Mau movement, and so on. So none of these things, our socioeconomic status was nothing that I had control over. The fact that I suffered from a lot of racist attacks during my years at school was not something I asked for. These were just the conditions and the environment in which I happened to be raised. Now, what I am responsible for, and what Abdu'l-Baha says we're responsible for, are the patterns that we weave with what we're given. So what we choose to make, given our limitations, given the conditions we're born in, given the injustices that are heaped on us, given the social injustices, given whether we're in a war-torn territory or not, whether we're in an environment where we experience racism or sexism, all of these things are beyond our control up to a point, except to the extent that we choose to focus on helping change those things in the world, but we can't make enough of a shift to make it change the experience that we have during our lifetimes. So this is the key point, that instead of complaining, which is what we're all very good at doing, it's just part of the human condition, we tend to focus on the negative and the woe is me and look how I'm suffering. If we instead say, what do I have control over? Given my limitations, given the things I can't control, what can I do? That is what matters. This actually brings to mind this wonderful statement of Viktor Frankl, the famous psychiatrist of the 20th century. You've probably read his books, and that this one particular book in which he says that this freedom to act, to react to our circumstances, he defines it as a spiritual freedom. And he says, even in the concentration camps, where you can't imagine kind of life worse than being in one of the concentration camps in Europe during the Second World War, it's similar to conditions that some people live in today. But he said, even within those camps, we saw the difference in reaction. He said, we were each given a dry piece of bread every morning that had to last us during the day. He said, some people would look to see who needed that piece of bread more than they did, and they would offer to share it. Others would wait until you turned your back, and then they would steal that dry piece of bread from you. And so he said, we saw, even under those very difficult conditions, some human beings choosing to behave like angels and others choosing to behave like swine. And I've always, again, found that really interesting. Now, understanding this reality of the difference of our capacities and what we're responsible for through this prism leads us to a wonderful sense of freedom. We can free ourselves from the shackles and the tyranny of comparison and competition, which actually are one of the things that squelch a sense of meaning in life and squelch happiness more than anything else, is when I look around me and I start to compare myself. How am I doing compared with this person? And social media has not helped this situation. The pressure starts to build within. First of all, there are the expectations of family and friends and society, or perceived expectations. Even if the expectations aren't real, we think people expect certain things from us. And so we think that we have to do certain things. As soon as we feel that we have to pursue life in a certain way, that immediately de-energizes us and removes our joy, because now we're not living an authentic life based on what we want and what brings us joy and what actualizes our potential and what gives us the maximum contribution to society. Now it's all about, my mom told me I need to go get a good job where I make good money and I have social status and I can always be secure, and that is the be all and end all. Imagine if that weren't there, that we just thought in terms of, how do I fulfill my potential? Then all we strive to do every day is to do our best and make every day better than the day before. Comparison and competition are destructive, not just to our spirits, but to our characters. No good can ever come from comparing ourselves with somebody else, because you get to one of two conclusions, neither of which are good for us. If you conclude, oh, I'm doing better than this other person, that leads to arrogance and hubris, because you've now made a judgment that you're better. And that is spiritually poison. On the other hand, if you conclude, oh, I'm really not doing as well as this other person or this group of people, it immediately puts a dent in our self-worth and our self-esteem and de-energizes us. And again, makes us miserable and robs us of the energy to want to do anything. I'm sure, I know we're all human. I know I have lived through periods where I have done that. And I have no doubt, given that you're all human, that you can all reach back into your memory and remember what it felt like when you felt you were less than, or you felt that somebody treated you as though you were less than, and you chose to take that on board somehow, instead of thinking, well, you know, that's their issue. It's got nothing to do with me. Everyone's entitled to their opinion. Now, the other thing this perspective does for us is it gets us to reframe our notions of success and failure. Very often we're driven to do things because we tell ourselves this story. This is that operating system in the computer, that if I do this, then this equals success. If I become a partner at a law firm, if I become the managing doctor in this practice, if I become the top professor in whatever, it just fill in the blank. If I end up with a house in the Hamptons and a house on one of the islands, then I have achieved a success. This is what sinks us. When we look at what our purpose is in life through the prism of what we talked about, fulfilling and actualizing our potential by weaving this tapestry, we come to recognize a really important thing, which is, and this is really a key takeaway, that success and failure are just mental constructs. Nothing is a success and nothing is a failure. It's how we interpret things in our own heads that make them seem as though we put a judgment on an experience and we say this experience equals success. This other experience equals failure. We then go to whatever length we possibly can to avoid what we perceive of as failures, and we strive as much as possible to achieve what we deem is a success. And yet, all these experiences are simply that, experiences. And here is the beauty. They all provide us with the same opportunity, an opportunity for growth. You know, Oprah Winfrey has a great comment apropos of failure. She says, failure doesn't exist. She says, failure is just a loving for the universe nudging you, saying, hey, honey, not in this direction, change your direction, just move in the other direction. In other words, what we perceive of as failures are actually working to our benefit. They're there to guide us, to push us from going down a path that may not be wholesome and redound to our highest good, but rather to another path. Let's look at an example of how this idea of success and failure is bound up with absolutist standards that we've now said that we need to reject. You know, when we go to school, and I know some of you on this Zoom session are at university or maybe just graduated, we're given tests, right? You're given a test and then you're judged in terms of how you do, if you get an A or a B. So let's now think of two people and let's look at their experience and let's see how commonsensical is it to be judging ourselves using these absolute standards of success and failures, which we then use to beat ourselves over the head. Oh my God, I didn't get enough A's. Oh my God, I didn't get into an Ivy League university. I didn't do this. I didn't get into a top law firm, etc. Let's take two human beings. Let's make it a young girl and a young boy. Let's say Maria and Bob. And let's say that Maria is born into a wealthy family. She's an only child. She's coddled. She has her own bedroom. She has plenty of food and snacks. She can do whatever she wants. She can stay up late and study, and she can have tutors to help her. Whereas Bob is born into a family where he shares a bedroom with 4 or 5 other siblings, and there are even more siblings in the house, and they don't have access to proper electricity, and they don't have much money. Their parents can't feed them a lot of good food, so instead of 3 meals a day, maybe they have 2 meals a day. Not enough protein. He can't stay up late at night to study because his other siblings need to sleep, doesn't have money for tutors. Now, they're both in the same class and they take the same exam. Maria gets an A and Bob gets a B. Are we really going to say that Maria's A means that she has greater capacity and is smarter and more capable than Bob? Yeah, it's an interesting question. So in my book, the fact that Bob, despite all his limitations, so the things that he couldn't control in his life, right? He didn't ask for them. Despite all of those limitations, he's been able to be such a focused student and work so hard that he's able to get a B. That, for me, is far more meritorious than Maria getting an A. So this is just to get us to stop and think about all these judgments that we impose on each other. Another judgment, and we all, I think, are guilty of this. And again, our aim here is to get us to think and to shift our consciousness. So often, we internally judge people like, oh, well, she lives in a poor neighborhood. She's only earning $40,000 a year. You know, whereas this other person, wow, look at the mansion they live in, look at the area they live in, look at the cars they drive. We tend to judge people in the sense of we think one is better than the other and that people are more worthy of our attention and time because of that. And it's really very silly, again, because it's back to the same thing. Is success really defined by these external indicia that have nothing to do with inherent self-worth and have nothing to do with fulfillment of our inherent capacity as human beings? It's a question mark. It's something that we should all think of. And the last thing on this topic is that one of the benefits of this this way of thinking about us having been born with a preordained capacity is that it raises our sense of self-worth and self-esteem. We recognize that we're essentially spiritual beings having a physical experience, and that our purpose in life is to be on this planet to give light to others and to receive light. And that is really the only gauge, whether I'm rich or poor or have a fancy titled job or whether I sweep the streets or clean the toilets, that's all irrelevant to my sense of nobility and dignity as a human being and to my spiritual station in life, right? Which none of us can see in each other, thank God. we have trouble enough judging each other based on these other very mundane indicia. So there's that beautiful quote from Marianne Williamson that our deepest fear, you remember this, is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that frightens us most. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, fabulous, and talented? And then she says, who are you not to be? You're a child of God, right? Your soul, born with capacity. Your playing small doesn't serve the world. There's nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We're all meant to shine as children do. We're born to manifest the glory of God that's within us. It's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. Back to that, nobody's bereft of capacity. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same, and we liberate them. Now, the second lens that the Baha'i writings give us is this, that to the extent that we focus our energies in life on achieving our life's purpose, to that extent we will be happy and live lives of fulfillment and meaning. So then the question that is begged here is, well, what is our purpose in life? And we start with this quote from the Universal House of Justice, that the purpose of this life is to prepare the soul for the next. How fascinating. This is unpacked quite a lot in the Baha'i writings. Abdul Baha says that he gives an analogy. He says, just as the fetus in the womb of the mother has one job, which is to prepare its limbs and organs for this life in this world, so that this child doesn't need those limbs and organs while it's in the womb, doesn't need legs to walk and doesn't need eyes to see, etc., but needs them for this world. So too, we in this world are living in the womb of the world, and our sole purpose here is to prepare our spiritual limbs for when we die and our soul continues to move through many worlds of God in a world that is timeless and is void of space. So this beautiful thing, the indispensable forces, it's not something that you can it's not an opt-in thing, like, yeah, well, maybe I'll do it, maybe I won't. They're indispensable. Indispensable forces of the divine existence must be potentially attained in this world. Now, let's unpack this a little more. The baby in the womb doesn't understand why it's developing its arms, legs, eyelashes, and it can't understand it. Has to take it on faith that this is necessary. So that's what we need, because once it's born, if it hasn't gone through this process of developing its limbs and organs, it will be born handicapped. What does that mean? That it can't enjoy this life the way it otherwise might. So too, if we fail to take on faith that this is essential for us to do, once we die, we will find ourselves spiritually handicapped. And we won't know that until we die. So best to be safe and do what we need to here. What are some of these spiritual limbs, some of these virtues? I have culled a whole bunch of them from the Baha'i writings, and you can see trustworthiness, faith, truthfulness. Boy, is there a dearth of truthfulness in the world today, right? Assurance, this feeling of certainty, purity of heart while communing with God, knowledge of God, forbearance, there is a dearth of that, love of God, resignation to what God hath decreed, philanthropic deeds, and so on. You see this whole radiance, illumination, service to our fellow man. So this is a smattering of things. This should really keep us busy for the odd 80, 90 years, if we're lucky to live so long that we have to live here. So this is what's going to be on our resume when we die, right? It's not going to be how many houses did you have and were they in really rich parts of the world, and how many degrees did you get? The question in terms of our own spiritual growth is going to be, how well have we done? How well has Sovaida done in developing these qualities? And we will determine our ability to advance in the afterlife. So it's cause and effect. No one's going to sit in punishment over us. We are just going to either hinder our own growth or spur it on. Final quote on this subject, Abdu'l-Baha says, unless we acquire these forces and attain to these requirements, we will surely be deprived of the life that is eternal. And that's always made me kind of sit up and pay attention. Do I really want to do this to myself? I do want to note here and highlight that there's a powerful link between fulfilling our potential, which was the first lens that we saw, that each of us is born with a preordained capacity and our job is to fulfill that, right? Between that and between achieving our life purpose. And the link is this, that as we strive to fulfill our potential, we develop spiritual qualities along the way, because we have to overcome obstacles. Like, I know one of my big challenges in life is patience. And boy, I've been hard at it for several decades now, and I don't feel like I'm making very much progress. But as I've gone, as I have tried to develop my capacities, I've constantly bumped up against opportunities to develop this virtue amongst others. Some I seem to be doing a little better, on others really not so well. So each of us gets to make that assessment for ourselves, that it's in the inherent nature of striving to develop our capacity that we then also get to develop spiritual qualities that are part of our purpose in life. Now, one of the other purposes of our lives, I love this, again, people don't always like to hear this, but sometimes the things we don't like to hear are exactly what we need to hear, right? A key purpose of our life, according to the Baha'i writings, is to overcome our deficiencies. Some are acquired deficiencies that we develop and acquire while we live, and some are inborn. And hand in hand with that, another purpose of our lives is to learn to control and direct our animal impulses. Because human beings are, we have the animal side of us, we are part animal, we have to eat and sleep and so on, but we also have the animalistic instincts of aggression and selfishness and so on, but we also have the spiritual side of us, and free will choice is always at play here. We can always choose to turn more towards our higher self, our souls, or we can be more animalistic. So the question is for each of us to go ahead and ponder after this presentation, what deficiencies do I have? We have to sit down and reflect and be honest with ourselves. What deficiencies was I born with, and which ones have I unfortunately adopted from my family, or from the way I was raised, or from society? And then our goal is to try and overcome them. Now, the other thing is learning. I wanted to actually read the entire quote to you about learning to control and direct our animal impulses and not be a slave to them. Here's the rest of the quote. Life in this world is a succession of tests and achievements, of falling short and of making new spiritual advances. It's just like being in school, except the standard is you're gauging against your own capacity and your own deficiencies. Sometimes the course may seem very hard. And then here's the clincher. The soul who obeys what? Obeys the teachings of the divine teachers sent by our Creator out of that Creator's love for us and in order to achieve happiness. The soul who obeys grows spiritually. The one who compromises for the sake of his or her own apparent happiness is seen to have been following a chimera. They don't attain happiness, they retard their spiritual advance, and they often bring new problems upon themselves. You know, some of us have a supermarket mentality when it comes to our faiths, our religions, regardless of which one. Oh, I like this idea and this faith, and so I'll do it. You know, I really disagree with this thing. I really don't like that. And so we justify in our own heads that I'm entitled to pick and choose. And this is what happens, that those of us who compromise and say, you know, I don't feel like I really need to obey this law or this teaching. It's really not for me. It's kind of, we think that we're above it and it's not really that important. We compromise. What happens is we don't get to the happiness that we seek. We retard our spiritual progress and we bring new problems in ourselves. So I just wanted to, I felt that was an important thing to highlight. The last thing here is that another purpose of our lives, according to the Baha'i writings, is to learn to know our Creator, to love and to worship him, her, whatever. We can't really describe our Creator in human terms, so we have to just make do with the limitations of language. And this, I love this quote because Baha'u'llah says that having created this world, our Creator chose to confer upon human beings the unique distinction and capacity to know the Creator and to love the Creator. This I love. This capacity must be regarded as the generating impulse and the primary purpose underlying the whole of creation. In other words, translate that the primary purpose that God created all of creation was for humanity to get to know and to love the Creator. That's pretty amazing. All of this created for that to happen. And how do we do this? We do this by learning to align our will with the will of the Creator and understand this very stark, very plain comment from the Baha'i writings that the Creator does whatever he wants and ordains whatever he pleases and shall never be asked of her doings, while all of us will be asked about every deed. So we got to understand we are the creatures, we are the creation. And how do we do this? We do this by recognizing the divine teacher that is sent for each day and age, surrender to their will and obey their teachings. So this concept of twin duties, recognition of the manifestation of God that is sent for any given day and obedience to their teachings. That is how we align our will with the will of God. And that is how we get to know and to love God. So in conclusion, what is the formula for success? This is what I came up with. So formula for success and for happiness and fulfillment is the following. We exercise our volition. So we harness our free will to do what? To develop our preordained capacity with the purpose of serving humanity while working to overcome deficiencies acquired and inborn, and obeying the laws and teachings of the manifestation of God, thereby aligning our will with the will of the Creator. In doing all of this, we get to develop our spiritual limbs for the life to come, and we get to know and love our Creator, thus achieving our life's purpose. So this to me is the formula for success. I want to end with this beautiful short paragraph out of a Baha'i prayer that is about aligning our will. It always gives me goosebumps. I want to share it with you. If it be thy pleasure, make me to grow as a tender herb in the meadows of thy grace, that the gentle winds of thy will may stir me up and bend me into conformity with thy pleasure, in such wise that my movement and my stillness may be wholly directed by thee. That is just so beautiful. And the last slide is that if you're interested in this kind of dialogue, I invite you to join me in the Reimagining Our World video podcast that you can find on the Center for Peace and Global Governance, CPGG YouTube channel. So we have 40 episodes already, and there are more that come every month. All right, I will stop sharing the screen now. And
thank you so much. Now we have time for questions, so people can put their questions in the chat. It's about this quote, so I'll read it for those of you who are listening in. As to thy question, doth every soul without exception achieve life everlasting? Know thou that immortality belongeth to those souls in whom hath been breathed the spirit of life from God. All save these are lifeless, they are the dead, even as Christ hath explained in the gospel text. He whose eyes the Lord hath opened will see the souls of men in the stations they will occupy after their release from the body. He will find the living ones thriving within the precincts of their Lord, and the dead sunk down in the lowest abyss of perdition. And that's by Abdul Baha. So the question is, does this mean that some souls are damned or die?
okay, excellent question. So the writings of the faith all need to be taken in conjunction with each other. And by the way, that is a Herculean task, because Baha'u'llah alone has revealed what amounts to over 100 volumes of direct revelation. So, but let's tackle this question head on. Abdul Baha himself, in many other places, talks about, we're back to the concept of relativity versus absolutism. He gives an example of creation. He says, so when we look at this world, we see different levels of life, of existence. We have the mineral kingdom, then we have the vegetable kingdom, the animal kingdom, the human kingdom that seems to be the highest life form. He says, yet each of these kingdoms in relation to each other can seem as though it's dead. So for the plant and for the animal and for the humans, the mineral kingdom appears to be like non-existent. And yet when we go into the atom and we see all the movement and whatever, we realize that the mineral kingdom is alive, but in relation to, say, human existence, it seems like it's dead. And the same is true for, taking any one of the kingdoms in relation to each other. He then goes on to explain that there are such things as degrees and stations. And there are many writings that also talk about degrees and stations in the afterlife. And related to this quote, those souls who have exercised their free will in this life to develop their souls, to recognize the manifestation of God, to follow the teachings of the divine teachers, those souls will have a greater understanding and will be able to understand those who haven't quite achieved their level of understanding. So those in this higher stations of consciousness, I think that's how I would frame it, and that's how I understand it from reading all the Baha'i writings, are able to understand the levels below them. But the levels below them, I cannot understand those above them. And I'm trying to scroll down. And in fact, this is encapsulated in this quote. He whose eyes the Lord hath opened will see the souls of men in the stations they will occupy after they're released from the body. So as you and I, so this is why we all really need to stay on our toes, because if we want to do well in the afterlife, it's the same in this life. I mean, we don't have to go far to understand. If you notice that if you go to a party or you go to an event and you gravitate towards people who are on the same wavelength as you, you recognize that some people just want to talk about mundane things. They just want to talk about how much money they made on the stock market or who won the the latest football game or the soccer game, and the extension they just put on their house, and that's all they want to talk about, like the restaurant they ate at and whether it was good or not good. And then others want to have elevated conversations. And you can see that those who are part of this group of wanting to have elevated conversations often can understand those who maybe don't want to have such elevated conversations. But it's very hard for those who don't want to have elevated conversations. They just have no interest and just don't seem to be able to grasp. It's like, what are you guys going on about? So it's that same kind of thing. Another very clear thing in the writings, there is no such thing as heaven and hell. Heaven and hell are not places that we go to when we die. So, and there, nobody sits in judgment saying, you did good, you go to heaven, you did bad, you go to hell. That our actions have consequences in terms of our spiritual growth. So here's another thing this is such an important question. That's why I'm dwelling on it here, because it's so important not to misunderstand and not to lose hope. The Baha'i writings tell us that while in this life, we're either always moving forward or moving backwards. There's no such thing as status. We can't kind of coast. You can't stay in one state. If you're not progressing, you're retrogressing by definition. But in the next world, we're told that all progress is forward moving. There is no retrogression. But to the extent that we've done our homework, we've developed our spiritual limbs, like that babe in the fetus, to that extent, we can determine how quickly and how well we're progressing in the afterlife. Now, think about two moving objects. They're both going forward, nothing's going backward. But if one is zooming past, relatively speaking, it feels to the person back here who's just bumbling along, going quite slowly, that they are falling behind. It is all part of the same. It's very hard to talk about a world that you and I can simply not understand given our limitations. You and I cannot fully understand what it is to move in a sphere that is free of time and space, right? So the Baha'i writings try to give us inklings, really to spur us. So I hope that, so starkly, no, souls are not damned. We can hinder our own spiritual development by the choices we make in this life, on whether to grow our spiritual limbs or not, on whether to focus on elevating our souls or to give into our animal impulses. And what will happen is cause and effect. There is no damnation. Nobody's going to sit in judgment and then assign us a locale, a locus to which we're sent, heaven or hell. And heaven or hell, finally, Baha'i writings tell us, are states of being that we experience even in this life. You know, there's some days I know I say to myself, oh my God, I feel like I've been in hell. And other days it feels like I've been in heaven. And the Baha'i writings tell us that is because we feel close to God or remote from God because of the choices that we've made. So I hope that has helped.
Thank you. The next question is, if the success recipe requires knowing one's capacity, would you please comment on the notion that none of us knows his or her preordained capacity, i.e. whether we are the teaspoon or the bathtub?
Well, we may not fully know, but it's one of our jobs is to get to know what our preordained capacity is. And the only way to figure it out is by trying our best. One of the things that I find fascinating about the Baha'i writings is that everything is crafted to keep us on our toes. We never get to the point because there's no absolute certainty. I don't know your spiritual station, my spiritual station. I don't know, as Abdul Baha says, he says, it won't be until we die that we figure out whether we actually are fully equipped with the eyes and limbs and organs that we need for the afterlife, the spiritual limbs. It's like when the babe is born, then we figure out, okay, it's come out whole, thank God. So it keeps us on our toes. And the same with developing our capacity. Now, there's a whole nother, there are many techniques for trying to determine one's preordained capacity. One is to just keep trying different things. Parents have a huge role to play because they observe and see propensities and tendencies and strengths that their kids have. There's a whole there are some wonderful people in the world who've done some wonderful work on, and I actually just gave a talk in Portugal about this in May, about how we can help ourselves and each other identify what our unique capacities are. Unfortunately, I don't have time to get into it here, but there are definitely ways. And the first thing is to sit down and try, also through meditation, reflection, consultation with friends, consultation with family, consultation with people who know you. It's actually not that hard. You may not, I mean, if you're looking for perfectionism, like I want to know the absolute totality of my capacity, we may not figure it all out, but you know what? 80% is good enough for me. So the Nelson Mandela quote, and yes, you know, the quote I read you from Marianne Williamson was often misattributed to Nelson Mandela. It was actually written by Marianne Williamson, but definitely coming from the same place and in the same spirit and that same level of understanding, right? People who are on the same wavelength, so to speak, who understand deep spiritual truths.
Can you talk more on the notion of failure? There are things we fail at.
Okay, this is a very good question. The feeling of failure in life, when I work with my clients, with my coaching clients, we unpack this. The feeling that, oh, I have failed, comes when we strive to achieve a goal, and then we don't arrive at the goal, but we are so attached to the outcome of the goal that we then view ourselves as having failed. The reality is that in the striving to achieve, so first of all, goals are very important. They're an important way of harnessing our energy, on having focus, on making ourselves enthusiastic, motivated, et cetera, et cetera. There are many reasons why setting goals is not only good, it's absolutely critical, actually, to fulfillment and a sense of happiness. The problem arises when we become so attached to the outcome of the goal that we tie our self-worth and our self-esteem to the outcome. And then when we, quote unquote, fail, in other words, are not able to achieve the goal, we think that we are a failure. In that very harsh judgment of ourselves, and because of that attachment that did not need to be there, what we actually fail to see, and which then redounds to our unhappiness, is that in the striving, we have been growing ourselves. If the purpose of our lives is to develop spiritual limbs and qualities, then whether you achieve a goal or don't achieve a goal is not a failure, because in the trying, you have been growing. And that is an unqualified success. So let me give a very concrete example. This is something many of us struggle with in life. We want something, fill in the blank, something you really want, you think is important, is a goal, and you work and work and work and work for it, and we don't get it, right? So we start to wonder, well, what's going on here? And am I a failure? So first thing I would note, that striving, that constant trying has been, in doing that, we've been developing the muscles of perseverance. Perseverance is a quality. It's a spiritual quality. It's one of the qualities we need for the afterlife. Now, sometimes you just we keep going, and then it goes over the line of perseverance into stubbornness and what Abdu'l-Baha actually calls insistence. He calls it the insistent self, saying, I want this, and by God, I'm going to get it, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to get it, because I know what's good for me, right? I know what's for my highest of good. That arrogance, that sense of I know best. So now we've moved past perseverance into stubbornness and insistence. Now what is required here? Now you have a new opportunity. we haven't achieved the goal, but now there's a new opportunity for growth. And what is that new opportunity? To learn detachment, which is another one of the divine virtues. So this is a no-lose proposition. We're either in the context of attempting to achieve this goal, we get to grow and develop perseverance and thereby achieve our purpose in life, or we get to develop patience, which is maybe now's not the time, which is another spiritual quality, or we get to develop detachment. So whichever way, and in the meantime, if we never arrive at that goal, is it that important that we got the goal or not? Whether I got this job or I got this thing or I got this degree or I got the guy or I got the marriage. No, what matters is the process and what qualities I was able to hone in getting there. And there is no failure here. Regardless of what happens, it's all opportunity for growth. Now, we don't always seize opportunities in a timely fashion, but that's not a failure either, because with, tests repeat themselves until we learn them. And maybe the way I'm built, I need to bang my head against a particular wall 5 or 6 times until I have a lump so big and so painful that I finally get it. So, but each one of those perceived failures is actually a milestone in the process to getting to the point where I have my aha moment. So it's all in the interpretation. There is no such thing as failure and success. Nothing in life has meaning until we attribute meaning to it. That's actually something to go and sit with. And we do ourselves such a disservice by constantly telling ourselves, oh, I failed. Oh, I failed. We beat ourselves up. And the problem with that is it de-energizes us. And when it de-energizes us, then we don't feel like doing anything. And then the whole purpose of life is squandered, because now we have this life with all these opportunities for growth, but we're feeling paralyzed because we're feeling so sorry for ourselves that we can't muster the energy. We just want to sit and eat chips and watch movies and Netflix and pull the covers over ourselves and kind of blot everything out. So I hope that helps.
Thank you. The next question is, don't religions, by requiring strict obedience to laws and teachings, cause unhappiness and a sense of self-unworthiness?
Again, it's a question of choice of how you choose to view it. So Baha'u'llah and his in this revelation, so remember, humanity's been growing, so the way we relate to things, so we're no longer the child who's told, do this, don't do that. Humanity is now standing at the threshold of maturity. So Baha'u'llah says the way even that the creator deals with humanity now changes. So for instance, in the Bahá'í Faith, we don't have clergy because we don't need human intermediaries between us to tell us what the manifestation of God meant or what God intended, right? So the same is here. Baha'u'llah says that I have not revealed to you a mere code of laws. We tend to view it, it depends on how you view laws. If you view them as strictures, like you don't get to do this, and you don't get to do that, and you get to, then yes, you're going to, if that's your approach towards law, then yes, naturally one is going to have the sense of, oh my God, I'm such a bad person if I didn't obey the law or whatever. But if we view it, he says, I have revealed instead something that will conduce to your happiness. If you want to guarantee your happiness, Baha'u'llah says, obey the laws of God, because there's a reason for them. We may not understand why they conduce to our happiness, but this is the mess we get ourselves in. We use what we think is our amazing intellect to try to analyze the laws of God. We determine that we don't want to obey them for whatever reasons. And then we say, oh, and now I feel so unworthy and unhappy and so on. The unhappiness comes in the the act itself. I'd give you an example. Actually, this is something a friend of mine had wanted to get married. I'm just thinking, because I'm trying to think about this is somebody that nobody knows, because our lives are completely separate from anybody in this group. So that's why I'm stopping to ponder. So a friend wanted to get married, lived with a gentleman for a number of years. The relationship broke up. He cheated on her. So fast forward a few years, she goes back to him, but knowing that her family and her parents would be very upset because they saw the decimation that his behavior wrought in her life. So she didn't tell them. So nurtured this relationship, moved back in with the guy, ended up telling a lot of untruths to her parents about where she was and what she was doing. So you're starting to see the effect on this person's life. They're starting to lie. They're starting to tell untruths. They're starting to sell themselves short, going back to a person. So when I talked to this person, I said, do you trust him? And they said, no. She said, no. I said, well, what are you doing here? You need to really stop and think about this. So eventually tells her parents, who are horrified, don't understand, and are even more upset because she's been lying to them now. So this amazing human being, this daughter whom they've trusted and loved, not a spring chicken, right? Somebody who's been around a few decades. So should know better, one would think. And then, not long after she tells her parents, she finds she's pregnant. And now the die is cast. Has to marry this person. Now finds themselves in this very unhappy situation of having a child with somebody they don't trust, who's cheated on them before, and there are now also lots of financial problems because neither of them's ready for this, and. And I remember sitting there thinking, wow, the laws of Baha'u'llah provide such protection from unhappiness. It's not about strictures. And back to the quote that one of the purposes of our lives is to learn to control and direct our animal impulses. That the very act of exercising control, there are many writings, obviously we didn't go through all of them, that very act conduces to our spiritual growth. So when Baha'u'llah says that these laws conduce to your happiness, they conduce to our happiness at a very literal level, as in this story of this friend of mine, who is now miserable and will continue, has now, in some sense, through her own free will choice, not that anyone's put her in hell, she's put herself in some sense, in a hellish life through her choices that she's made. But in addition to that, we deprive ourselves of the benefit of spiritual growth that results from learning to control our animal impulses. So this is dual-pronged unhappiness comes from it. So it's nothing to do with a self-unworthiness. So if you don't like it, change it. No need to feel unworthy. If each of us gets to the point where we realize, oh, wow, I've been heedless. And we're all heedless. We're all in the same boat. We're all in the same human boat. It's just in different areas of life. Some of us are challenged in one area, others of us are challenged in other areas. No area is better or worse than the other. We each need to, again, focus on what is my deficiency? What is my acquired deficiency or inborn deficiency? Where do I need to control my impulses and work on me? It's a tailor-made solution, and nobody can do it for another person. We each get to do it for ourselves. So that's really what I would say, because a lot of people use this comment that you've made as a battering ram both against religion and to give themselves an out as well. So
Thank you.
oh,
The Universal House of Justice asks us to be harmonizers. How can we be harmonizers in a polarized society?
yeah, so it's actually easy. And I'll tell you why. Don't allow people to frame the conversation as step number one. As soon as you get people to frame the conversation, which usually happens in this way, take whatever the subject is that is polarizing, and there, God knows so many of them. And then the person says to you, pick a side. You're either for this or against this. You're either for this side or you're against this side. So the first thing to do is to be smart enough to recognize that that's going on and say, no, I'm not playing this game. Second step, you elevate the conversation. You now frame the conversation. And it's very easy. You start with, this is how I do it. I don't know, it may not work for you, but I'll just share with you. I tell people, look, I happen to believe that we are all spiritual beings having a physical experience. Not only are we all spiritual beings, but we all are created and come from the same source, same creator. The essence of what makes us spiritual is the part of us that is the soul that we don't see. That soul has, according to my beliefs, no gender, no race, no ethnicity, no nationality. And my purpose and all of our purposes in life, I believe, are to develop certain critical spiritual qualities and to help create a just and peaceful world by recognizing our oneness. And that is what I'm spending my life working on myself, but also working to raise consciousness about our oneness. Because all of this polarization is due to that one essential problem, the failure to recognize that we are one, that all human souls come from the same source, that in the sight of God, no one of us is favored over the other. And then you leave it at that. So you elevate, you harmonize at a different level. You can't harmonize down here. You can't get involved in the fray and then try to harmonize. That doesn't work. You've got to elevate the whole conversation and say, let's start from scratch. Who are we? What are humans? What are we here to do on planet Earth? What is our purpose in life? You reframe the conversation. So I think it's not only just the way to do it, I think it's the only way to do it, because I have not seen success with anything else. Otherwise you get sucked into it. It's impossible not to get sucked into, because then people are very clever. Oh, you don't believe in justice, and oh, you're standing by and letting this happen, and oh, you won't speak up about this, and you won't stand up for that, and each side is doing that, and they're pulling you, and you're getting stuck in the middle. I will share with you that I had this experience. I grew up for a number of years in Haifa, Israel. I went to Arab school and I lived in a Jewish neighborhood. And when I come home from school every afternoon, my Arab friends, so when you enter buildings, apartment buildings, there's like one doorway that leads to the main stairwell. So as my mother and I would come home after her work in my school, my Arab friends would be standing on one side and my Jewish friends on the other side, my Israeli friends, and they would be throwing shoes over our heads and saying, pick a side, pick a side. You're either with us or you're with them. And my refrain for all the years I was there, the 9 years, was that I love you both. You're all human beings. It makes no difference to me. You know, we're all creatures of God. We're all children of God. And just refuse to engage with all the conversations of who did what to whom, when, how many, let's go back this many years and that many years and that many years. It's endless. And it never stops. Same in this country between our two polarized parties. You can't, at some point, you got to wipe the slate clean and say, what happened, happened. let's decide who we want to be going forward, recognizing our oneness, recognizing our humanity, recognizing, as the Universal House of Justice said, that we are all protagonists on a common journey towards the same destination. That's it. It's the only way to do it.
Thank you. In the Baha'i writings, isn't heaven a station of being close to God for people who have accumulated spiritual attributes, and hell far from him for those who haven't?
Well, again, it's a cause and effect. So as you develop the person, the soul who expends energy and effort in developing attributes and in serving and in getting to know God and in loving God. So there's several kind of criteria, by definition grows. Remember the two things moving faster? So we're all moving to get closer to the Creator. We'll never fully get there. So it's an eternal journey. But to the extent that we're expending effort, then yeah, you're going to move faster and get closer. It's not that places are assigned to you, but the effect of the work that we're doing is, yes, we're moving ourselves closer to the Creator, which is the whole objective.
There's a question about, people that get married before knowing each other, but then having kids and then being unhappy in their marriage. The question is, how do we get ready for relationships that are fulfilling so that we don't hurt our children?
Okay, that's a whole topic. There's actually a wonderful book in the Ruhi series, book 12, which is all about marriage. And if you haven't studied it, I would warmly recommend that you get together a group of friends and go through. It's actually very enlightening. We did it actually, I think a couple of people with whom I did this maybe on the Zoom call. And we found that it was very enlightening and useful, not only to people who weren't married, but for people who had been married, both short periods, longer periods, and very long periods, and for people who'd been married and divorced. So everybody found that there was much of usefulness in terms of enlightening us and uplifting us. So that's a whole nother topic. Happy to talk about it some other time, but I don't think this is the right occasion.
That makes sense. Thank you. I think we're at our time now. So thank you so much for your talk and for answering all of our questions.
Thank you. Thank you all for your patience and for your attention and for engaging. That's the most important thing, so that it became more of kind of an exploration. I wish I could hear your voices speak, but this is the setup. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you. And this recording will be uploaded to our YouTube channel in a few days, Bahá'í Faith Modern Perspectives, so you can rewatch it or share it with people who weren't able to attend. And our speaker next week will be Mr. Ron Cohen, and the topic is Science and Religion and Atheism. So these talks occur every Saturday at noon Eastern time, and I'll put the link to our contact form in the chat. Thank you, everyone. See you next week. Bye.